I haven't in the past had to compete with Chris Whitty, but that's kind of things. My name is Tanya Beckett. I was here, as I was saying, about 150 years ago. I studied metallurgy and materials science, and which was a great honour and a privilege. And so I still, I'm proud to say, have very close connections with the college, which I enjoy very much. I quite often get asked to moderate things for the college because I work for the BBC. My role at the BBC is as a news presenter. So since 1998, I've worked in New York, presented the news on PBS. I was very excited because the BBC had an agreement with PBS, and I was in New York, and I remember looking out of the window and seeing a very American experience and realising you're now in America and seeing my face 5 stories high inside a square, and dropped the phone and said, please get it off, that's but anyway, that's America for you. Then now I continue to work for the BBC some of the time, you read the news, but I also make current affairs documentaries. Now the reason radio documentaries, it's called The Inquiry, and it's very good, and it's available on BBC Sounds, The Inquiry with an I. When we work in news and current affairs, we often have difficulties and long discussions around how to make things relevant to people. How do you talk about an election on a continent far away, with people, voters far away, who seem to have interests which are very divergent from our own? How do we make things relevant to people, and how do we communicate? What language do we use, or do we not bother? At the BBC, we obviously have a particular remit, so it is our remit to bother, but that is really the art, is the language that you use and how you make things relevant. Generally, you make it relevant by trying to excite. People are quite selfish, right? They're really interested in what's going to affect them. So if you can find a way to make it relevant very specifically to them, or to draw parallels with their lives, that is generally how you begin to connect with people. Now, academics have a similar problem. And I'm proud to say I've got 4 very distinguished academics behind me. They have their own language. They go into their own world with things. And sometimes it doesn't always seem to connect with other people. But I'm happy to say that the 4 people behind me are very good at doing exactly that. So we're now going to take you through a journey of science, the humanities, language, history, and the politics, the history of politics. With the 4 people we've gathered are going to tell you how they communicate and their outreach projects. Now, I'm going to introduce them one by one. They're going to give sort of a little 10-minute introduction to how they communicate what it is that they do. Allow me first to introduce you to Dr. Katerina Johnson. I'm the only non-doctor here, so I'm feeling a little bit academically on the back foot. Some of you may be aware that there is a lot of research in the moment into the microbiome in your gut. How healthy is the bacteria in your gut? The reason that people are doing this, it is becoming increasingly evident that there is a strong connection between the health of our gut and the health of the rest of our body. And so I'm going to introduce Kathryn by saying that she studied biological sciences at Pembroke College, continued with her DPhil here in interdisciplinary bioscience, focusing on the research field exploring the connection between our gut, its microbiome, and our brain. So without further ado, let me use the expression, what happens in Vegas? And Katerina will explain why the word Vegas is relevant here, I'm sure. So Katerina.
Yeah, so just like a quick overview to my work in public engagement. I'd say kind of my biggest motivation for communicating science to the public is because at the end of the day, science isn't only for scientists. It affects all of our lives, from the way we see the world to how we choose to live. And ultimately, it's the public who funds research. Research, especially in biological sciences, is moving faster than ever. And I really think that people have a right not only to know, but also kind of to benefit from, that knowledge. And, often I feel that science is sometimes made too simple. which can actually really kind of quell its beauty, because a lot of the fascination is in the detail. But that doesn't mean that it has to be kind of complicated. And I think engaging people is all about a balance between kind of instilling a sense of kind of wonder and inspiration, especially kind of inspiring the next generation. But it's also about answering that question of, how does this affect me in my life? And part of science communication that I think isn't done enough is giving caveats and presenting kind of the nuance, because that's something that I try to do in my TEDx talk, because I think otherwise the public can get confused and also potentially even kind of start to mistrust science if, 1 minute they hear headlines saying, oh, it's good for you to eat this or that, and then, the next minute, oh, no, maybe not. So, yeah, I think I enjoy talking to kind of a range of different audiences, and sometimes that might be people who are actually, primarily at an event for something else, maybe the music festival or, at a Comic-Con. But I think that those types of interactions can actually be kind of just as rewarding, if not more so, because you kind of have the opportunity to capture people's attention who otherwise might not kind of choose to learn about science. It was interesting actually at the Comic-Con afterwards, they gave people like an evaluation, and they were asked different questions, and one of them was, how did it affect how you feel about science? And some of the answers were things like, I realize it can be fun and relevant, or kind of, it's more interesting than I thought, and it links to things we enjoy. And that's something that I think is so key to get across, because science isn't just about kind of facts. It's the kind of people seeing how it interacts with their lives, and, the personal storytelling element as well, where we kind of connect with one another, on kind of a human level. One might wonder, I suppose, if that's something that might be lost as AI becomes kind of ever more prevalent. Although, who's to say what AI could be capable of in the future? And then, of course, there's kind of standard, broadcast channels where you normally have a very short time and it's kind of all about getting your key messages across from your research. But, I do think that it's kind of the perfect opportunity to explain your work to the public in your own words. Obviously, with live interviews, you always have to be prepared that you can be asked anything on the spot. And I think it's in our human nature to interpret scientific findings sometimes the way we want. One example of this is actually my first TV interview, which happened to be with Kay Burley from Sky News. So I was kind of thrown in the deep end, but it was quite a fun discussion. But basically, I was talking about, the value of having a rich social network in terms of stimulating our endorphins, which are kind of the feel-good chemicals in the brain that give us pleasure and take away pain. I'll just play a short clip now, which shows one of her questions that she asked near the end of the interview.
But it's interesting because also, for example, so you look in a tonic pain agents, those show that they decrease their social support, so things actually can actually have reduced the pain that they feel. Just let me check, just generally that you're just gin. Right, so this is probably why people feel a bit more sort of relaxed and comfortable with socializing. That's the very nice was working participant thing, because that was one of our suicide relations, because basically working outside for that I've gotten up there for students to do that. Okay.
But yeah, obviously, since that was, an interview, I could kind of reply and, engage. But I think it kind of goes to show what we probably all already really know, that, people can be tempted to take away, from what they kind of want to hear. And I think also with communications maybe increasingly online and social media, it's becoming a lot more kind of one-directional, and people are perhaps kind of consuming a lot of content. But I think the risk with that is that there can be kind of a lack of depth, and also you miss out on the kind of important interaction element as much. And then finally, also, it's always nice to kind of try and shape the way your work is presented to the public, whether that's, for example, helping with, writing press releases that kind of explain your work to journalists in a way that's kind of easy for them to understand and, like report on. I guess, might form part of the broader discussion how relevant these kind of traditional channels like newspapers or books are in today's world. Fortunately for me, books are still selling well and the market's actually growing, but AI might change that. Hopefully not before my book's out though. But all in all, I really think that actually if academia can capitalize on it, now more than ever, there's a real kind of desire for experts to kind of cut through the noise and to kind of have trusted voices in a society where we have kind of such an overload of information.
Katerina, thank you very much indeed. Thank you. Yeah, I'm sorry about the cake though, man, but if you knew cake personally as I do, then it's no surprise to me to start asking that. Right, so let's now move from the world of science and the microbiome. You didn't say what the vagus nerve is.
Oh, well, I can. Oh, yeah. So my book's all about the connection between the gut and brain, and there's a lot of different ways in which our gut can communicate with our brain. And one being kind of the vagus nerve, which is the channel of communication. And actually, people used to think in the kind of more the olden days that the brain was in charge. And, the other organs were largely listening to what the brain said. But then actually, when they looked at the fibers of the vagus nerve, they found that about 80 to 90% of them are actually communicating from the body, including from the gut, back to the brain. And so we've got this idea now that the brain is actually much more kind of a receiver of information. And the gut can affect so many various aspects of our lives that is really kind of exciting, area. But yeah. It will all be in my book.
Excellent. So buy the book if you want to find out. That's what Kathryn is telling you. Jolly good.
I think the thing's lost connection.
Oh.
There we are.
Well, I'm going to fill the time, not with a tap dance, but by introducing, fortunately for you, Nicholas Cole, who's Senior Research Fellow at Pembroke College and Director of the Quill project. I'm going to allow him to explain a little bit more about what that is, but it's a digital humanities project that studies the history of constitutional law. Try communicating that to an audience, but fortunately, he is Pembroke's academic director, and he's very good at communicating all of that. His research focuses on legal history, the history of political thought, and the history of the transmission and the reception of ideas. And I'm hoping now we do have.
I don't think we do.
And we might just touch
the remote is not working.
Would you like me to
Sorry, that's what I have.
Click through?
You could, or somebody could click through.
Somebody could click.
Could you just click through?
Could we just go to the first slide and then go from that?
There's a great connection actually, because this is about not only communicating out but actually real collaboration. So. I'm interested in how modern constitutions get written. Not sort of ancient lawgivers giving constitutions, but the sort of modern world of this kind of assembly process. How do you get 60 people or 300 people to agree what the rules for their society should be? And the story really kicks off in 1787 with the American Constitutional Convention. But next slide, there is one. Does it work? Excellent. Good. So I came to Pembroke about 10 years ago, which is incredible. I didn't have any grey hair. I've just realised I need to update my LinkedIn profile, and the picture is from 10 years ago, and I'm hesitating about getting rid of it, but I need to. Anyway, and I just started to get interested in this problem. There are 50 American states, but they've written between them at least 235 constitutional texts, and there are only 4 books that have ever been published on how all of those texts have been written. which is quite extraordinary. And I was interested in the fact that not only were people not writing about this, but the archival material that you would need in order to write about this properly was not online. And one of the problems with that, and it's a problem not only for the public, though it is a problem for the public as well, but also for researchers, is that these texts are very hard to work with because they describe a text coming together over a period of months or even years. The Indian constitution took 3 years to write, and it's a constantly evolving text. So state constitutions in America can take a year to write. So that's very hard to study. So I was interested in how we sort of crack that, not only for the public in an era when trust in institutions is very low, but actually for researchers as well. So over the last decade, we've built a digital approach. I'm a huge, huge disappointment to my undergraduate tutor who didn't think that serious people worked on American history. He told me this. And wrote all of his books longhand. So I now work on American history with computers. And he is as polite as he can be about it. But we built a digital platform to help explain, this is just what sort of a visual representation of one day of debate might look like, and to sort of give you a sort of word track changes view of a text coming together and all of the manuscript images and so on that you would need to understand it. And behind the scenes, there's an awful lot of computing power that goes into all of that. That's not what I want to talk about. One of these institutions is a 400-year-old constituent college of Oxford University, whose students go through a rigorous process of selection. And the other one is a 20-year-old university in Utah, which is open enrollment, which means that literally anybody can go. It's the largest university in the state. And it just so happened that at the exact moment that I was sitting in an office somewhere in this photograph, thinking about how we might do work on these texts, I happened to be friends with the then president of the university on the left, who just set up a Centre for Constitutional Studies and were looking for projects for their students to do, because they had an ethos of saying undergraduates should understand their subjects by getting involved in research work, which is a very forward-looking thing for an open enrollment university to emphasize. And so I went over there and we started talking about the kinds of projects that they might do. The person who really thought all this up was Matt Holland. He was the president of Utah Valley University at the time. And then one of the people who really made it work was a great friend, Rodney Smith, who very sadly died of cancer during COVID. These are some of the students at the Centre for Constitutional Studies. I could tell you stories about literally all of them. They come from backgrounds that would make even our most underprivileged students at Pembroke look relatively privileged. What do they get involved in? Well, they get involved in going into archives and sorting through and collating the materials related to state and federal constitutional law. They're involved in scanning a lot of documents. We did a project looking at the 13th, 14th and 15th Amendments over the last 3 years, and some of the materials related to the 14th Amendment even, which is one of the critical amendments that is quoted every day by the Supreme Court of the United States in some way or other, hadn't been ever published, so that some of it's scanning and digitization. They're involved in transcription, so that is sort of editing text down, creating then digital editions, and then they're very involved, overseen by a team at Pembroke, but the students are very involved in doing some of the modeling and analysis, and then helping with some of the dissemination work. These are some of the projects that we've done. So our sort of test project, just looking at what state-level archives really looked like, involved going into the Utah archives in 1895, And if you told me that one of the first major research projects I would have done in this area would have involved Utah, I wouldn't have believed you. But it was precisely because of this collaboration that actually that was one of the first state archives we looked at. And as a direct result of that project, they then won one of the largest ever grants, because we proved that students could go in and could do really, really, really important archival work. And the National Endowment for the Humanities agreed and funded a big 3-year project on constitution writing in the American West. And if you look at the dates, you'll know that that project ran through COVID, and while a lot of other projects were falling apart, they were sufficiently organized enough to keep it together. And the ability to collaborate online is incredible. They then did a project with us on the Reconstruction Amendments, 13th, 14th, 15th Amendment, and the 19th Amendment, and they have a big project on the Constitution of Illinois, which was written in 1969 and took a year to write. The boxes on the right there are that's the record of part of the record. I think you could fill about 5-6 photographs of that size, relating to how Illinois' state constitution was written. Absolutely enormous project. And they've just won a second grant, this time from the US National Archives, that's looking at constitution writing before the Civil War. As a direct result of all of that, and the fact that working with this group of students, we proved that this was a viable model for research. Pembroke won with SOAS, the Oxford History Faculty, and SOAS won an AHRC grant looking at the writing of India's constitution. We've had graduate students in India going into archives for us there, and we'll be welcoming a junior research fellow for a year to Pembroke from India next year. We got offered papers relating to the Good Friday peace agreement, which we wouldn't have been offered if we hadn't done that work, and that kick-started a huge project that we've done on peace processes, and especially the Northern Ireland peace process. Other institutions in the United States have asked to collaborate. Some of them have been ordered by their state legislatures to work with us, which is fun. They're not always pleased about it. And we have a project in Western Australia, looking at the writing of Australia's constitutional texts. That's a sort of map of all the places that we're working in at the moment. We now run 2 summer schools for students from UVU every year, and we run a couple of other courses with other American institutions on the same model as well. We've worked with over 100 students just from UVU. We've worked with about 50 from other institutions. Many of the students, if you don't know about Utah, they've got a large native population. They've got a lot of people who live in very impoverished circumstances, and many of the students we worked with have then gone on to law schools. Somebody who worked with us on the Reconstruction project, who was literally abandoned by her parents at 16, has now won a PhD studentship to Penn State, which is a top university in the States. One of our alumni is the youngest chief of staff in the US Senate, and their work's been cited at state Supreme Court level. So, this is important because state constitutions decide who owns what and how land can be used and all these other kinds of questions. And so the fact that this material is made available does actually change things. They've just set up a master's course for teachers, drawing on this research work, which they're running at UVU. And they have a summer course, which I've just come back from teaching on, for high school teachers about how to teach constitutional law. And none of that would really be possible without the research underpinning it. So some thanks. Matthew Holland, the president of UVU, and Rodney Smith, I've already mentioned, and other people have very generously supported the students. Brian and Angela Wood, David and Lorraine Sterling, and Heidi Miller have all given significant funds to support students in their work. I wanted to finish with this. This this is what we've said about ourselves for the 400th. We've said we're a community in the University of Oxford that supports research and research-led teaching for the common good. We're a global community and we aim to have global impact. I think this project hits most of those notes. So thank you.
Thank you so much. So I'd like to now go on to Kathryn Eccles, Associate Professor and Senior Research Fellow at the Oxford Internet Institute in Pembroke College as well, a specialist in the fields of digital humanities and cultural heritage. So we're going to explore a little bit more about how to use modern digital technology in order to reach out. Kathryn.
Oh, thank you. Thanks so much. It's working, hurrah. So I give a longer version of this talk, which is called How Public Engagement Changed My Life. And it really did. And it started with the project that you're seeing showcased here, which was an early career fellowship that I had from the AHRC to investigate a brand new initiative around crowdsourcing, when crowdsourcing was a really new initiative itself. So you might have heard about the Zooniverse, people classifying galaxies, people looking at snapshots of animals in the Serengeti. There are all sorts of ways in which members of the public can get involved in projects that catalogue data. So we've got an awful lot of data available to us, but oftentimes we don't have the mechanism or the resources to catalogue that data and make it useful. So at the time that I was doing this project, a big organisation that's now called Art UK had taken an awful lot of pictures of public art in the public hands. So anything in museums and galleries that had been funded by the public, but also artworks on the walls of council buildings, or I think one was on the wall of a lighthouse. So all up and down the country, all over the UK, artworks that were held in the public hands. So they had all of these beautiful, high-quality images of artworks, but they didn't have any way of sifting through them. And they wanted to create a virtual museum, a museum without walls, that anyone could wander into and find what they were looking for. Mm. And so they launched a crowdsourcing project so that anyone with no art historical expertise whatsoever could look at a painting and give really useful information about what that painting looked like and what it was about. So that was a brilliant project. The thing I was interested in was what would make somebody do that? Why would someone be interested in tagging these images? And what did they get out of it? What were they learning? Did it inspire them to go and do something else? And so that was what my project was about. Who is crowdsourcing and why? And I came to the end of that project with a whole set of really wonderful findings. People who'd started new educational endeavours after being a tagger, being somebody who was tagging this art. Somebody gave up smoking by tagging paintings instead because they found it so compulsive. It got people through really dark times. It was a great boost for language teachers. All kinds of incredible findings. But possibly my favourite part of the project was quite a coincidence. The Social Sciences Division, which is the division in which my department sits, wanted to do something called a Live Friday. I don't know if anyone's been to Live Friday. It's where they throw the doors open to the Ashmolean Museum for a couple of hours in the evening. So you get to go behind the scenes at times that you're not normally allowed into the museum. And scientists, researchers, anyone from the university will give talks about what they're doing and use objects in the museum to tell that story. And so the whole Social Sciences Division got together to run a Live Friday. And I was full of ideas. I was full of enthusiasm. I said, I've got this fantastic project. Maybe I could have a printout of one of the paintings from the collection, this beautiful Allori portrait of a young man from the Renaissance collections. I'll print him out really big and we can stick labels on him and do some live crowdsourcing right in the museum. And they were very worried about people sticking things on real paintings, but we got around that and we put him sufficiently far away from the real thing to stop people from being confused. So that's what you're seeing in the middle here. We did some live crowdsourcing in which we showed members of the public how does it work? How do you come up with the sorts of terms that are useful? Does it matter? Answering all of these questions by actually doing. And it was wonderful. And because I'm an idiot and I didn't think all of my ideas would get taken up, I was also doing a sort of digital wonder cabinet to show
the ideas behind the generation of the original collections that became the Ashmolean. And I also had an apothecary on the top floor of the Ashmolean, giving out prescriptions for the art to kind of recognise the well-being aspects that I'd found in the tagging. So I got very, very fit that evening, running up and down the stairs of the museum. But it was one of the best things I've ever done. And I learned so much from engaging with people. The sorts of questions they were asking were really fantastic. They really gave me new directions, new ways of thinking about the project. And so this was the moment that it really changed my life. I thought I have to keep working with museums and I have to keep doing these events because I generated so many ideas just from interacting with those members of the public. And that sort of led on to this project. So there was a slight sort of middle part, thinking about collections, how collections become generated, how we can further interactions with art and objects. Led to something called the Cabinet Project, which is a teaching and learning platform for engaging with objects from our brilliant museums here in Oxford. And this was a collaboration that extended from that with the Pitt Rivers Museum, where we used an AI-based model to deliver augmented reality versions of objects from the collection so that you could sort of virtually take something out of the cabinet. So I'm sure lots of you have been to the Pitt Rivers Museum. If you haven't, I really urge you to go and have a look. It's a wonderful place, but it's very traditional in the way that it's presented. The cabinets are absolutely full of objects. It's catalogued in quite a curious way. So the museum itself is a bit of a curiosity. So sometimes it's hard to see things. And so this object here, for example, this Yoruban object has a lid on top. You can't see around the back of the object. It's in a cabinet full of objects from the same place. So what do we do with that? How do we get people to get closer to it? Well, we enable it to come out of the cabinet, get turned around. You can turn her upside down. You can see all of the detail and you can look inside the cup. And all of this came from workshopping with members of the public. What do you want from the museum? What would you love to be able to do? And actually being able to handle the objects, even if it's in a virtual space, became a really important part of being able to connect to the stories and enable the museum to have a greater, more positive connection with its audiences. There's all sorts of wonderful things that came out of this project. My favourite is this Hyder helmet that you can see here, which is one of the prized objects from the collections. It's one of the ones that features on the website a lot. It's a beautiful bear head with octopus legs. So it's a really curious object from the Hyder, from Hyder Gwai, and it's a helmet. And if you offer people the object, the real thing, people, put your gloves on, you handle it, and then you pass it carefully to the next person, hoping you don't drop it in the meantime. When you 3D print it, which is what we did at the top there, as soon as people have it in their hands, they put it on their head. And so there's something really wonderful there about using technology to tell the stories of the objects and maybe creating a more authentic connection with something that is in the middle. It's a medium. It's a way of telling the story. So finally, I just wanted to showcase some of the work that my students are doing. So 2 of my doctoral students and I have been running exhibitions as a way of trying to tell stories about AI. So AI is, on the march. We hear really positive stories about it, but increasingly we're hearing really negative stories about it. How is it going to take our jobs? How is it going to make decisions that we might not be very comfortable with? But there's also, I think, an awful lot of noise about the idea that we won't understand AI, that there's something mysterious about it, and therefore we can't know it. And what my students are really keen to do is to be able to tell stories about AI in ways that make sense. And so we had these 2 exhibitions. The first one was called Design Interrupted. It's the work of my brilliant student, Maggie Musterklam, who is trying to talk about the ways in which AI is now being used in processes of design. So when you look for inspiration, let's say you're making over your bathroom, you want some inspiration, so you go to Instagram, or you go to Pinterest, or you go to Google, and the algorithm will serve up lots of images that help you decide what you want your bathroom to look like. But of course, there's not so much that we know, in fact, about what the algorithm is showing us, or where those images come from, or what images aren't included. And so there's a process that is going on with the algorithm that is dictating our taste, that is shaping the way that we think about what's hot, what we want our design to look like. And she wanted to show that in practice. And so she had an algorithmic design process and a traditional design process where, people were ripping pictures out of magazines and using analog ways of creating mood boards. And when you go through that process, when you actually walk yourself through that, it's much easier to see where the algorithm is intruding. And then finally, the student that did this wonderful project is Laura Herman. It's called the Algorithmic Pedestal, and it was a way of pitting the algorithm against a human curator. So what happens when we ask a human curator to take a set of images? This set was from the Met. What would they do with them? How would they arrange them? What decisions would they make? And then when we gave them to an algorithm, in this case it was Instagram, how does Instagram present them? And what can we learn about what Instagram is thinking, if we want to use those terms? How do we understand what it's doing there? And so we printed out the human curation and the algorithmic curation on silks and had people engage with them. And it was fascinating because almost everybody was relieved that they enjoyed the human curation more. They felt that was more satisfying. But actually, most people spent the majority of their time on the Instagram side trying to work out what decisions Instagram was making. So here's a really effective way of saying there's a lot we don't know here. And there's a lot of terms that we use that are a lot like analog processes that we really understand. But are they the same? Actually, can we understand more about what the algorithm is doing if we compare them in this really direct way? So that's been a really wonderful, rich and exciting way of thinking through, AI's role in our life through an exhibition. Who doesn't love an exhibition? That's probably enough now. I'll stop.
Gosh, that's really excellent. Thank you. Used the word multiple times, storytelling there. What do we mean by storytelling and narrative? Well, when we are trying to communicate something, if we can construct it into the format of having an underlying question, having a journey, and you present what the quest is at the beginning, and then you take the audience through that journey. Now, the reason that people engage in that is because they are then thinking as if you were watching a film or reading a book, well, what is going to happen next? And if you can get people thinking, I want to know what happens next, then you hold their attention for longer. So what Kathryn is describing there, and I think what Eccles described very well, and also Katerina, is this idea of taking people through a narrative, and the art is to build that narrative. Speaking of which, allow me please to introduce Gabriel Schenk. So Gabriel finished his DPhil here in English literature in 2015. But during his time here, I believe it was during his time here, he set up the Tolkien lecture, Tolkien as in the author of The Hobbit and so on, Lord of the Rings. And that brought people in from outside the college. And he also put it online and made it accessible to people outside the college. He also has a very interesting project that I know he wants to talk about in Africa, bringing brilliant students together in African countries. So without further ado, let me hand over to Gabriel.
Thank you. Thank you very much. The first thing I want to talk about is the Tolkien lecture in fantasy literature. And the first thing to mention about that is that it's not just me. It was co-founded by me and my friend Will Badger back in 2012, and then we had the first lecture in 2013. And now we have this wonderful, huge committee of students, some of whom are in the room. So it is very much a student-led thing, and it really does take a village to put this on every year and get lots of different inputs. And I'm just one small cog in the machine now, which is great. The picture up here is from the very first lecture, which we had at Broadgates Hall, because the Shep Auditorium wasn't quite finished in time. And Kid Johnson was delivering the first lecture. And as you can see, I mean, it's almost extraordinary to see Broadgates like that, with people just off the streets sort of packed in, and probably quite illegally sitting in places where they shouldn't be sitting for fire regulations and so on. But we really just wanted to pack the room. And then this picture here is from 2024, just a few weeks ago in June. And Neil Gaiman, who is one of the biggest authors on the planet, delivering the latest lecture in the town hall to about 740 people. The number of people who come to hear the the speaker at the talk and lecture series is always purely determined by how many we can fit into the room. We always have an enormous waiting list of people who couldn't get tickets. I should say that all Pembroke students and staff and part of the Pembroke community get preference, and there's a separate ballot for them so that they can always get a seat. But otherwise, we open it up to the public, and about 2/3 of the audience are members of the public. And actually, every year, because we have a different speaker every year, we get very different people through the door, and depending on the speaker's fan base. It's not clear in these two images, but most of the time we're in the Bichette Auditorium. So most of the time we are actually in Pembroke College. It was rare that we were in Oxford Town Hall, but we wanted to get more people in. You do lose something by not being in Pembroke, but perhaps one day we can extend the Bichette Auditorium so we can get more people in. The lecture series isn't actually about Tolkien. It's in honor of Tolkien. It's about fantasy literature, and we define fantasy as extremely broadly. So we can bring in pretty much anything you can imagine that is speculative, that asks what if. So science fiction, even horror, Stephen King, for example, Kafka, Diana Wynne Jones, Tolkien, Ursula Le Guin, even the Bronte sisters. It is a very broad spectrum of thought. And the idea is to promote fantasy literature and storytelling and literature more generally, and the academic study of that, and not to keep it to ourselves, but actually to get as many people into an academic lecture as possible. And the speakers are fantasy writers who are talking about their own craft, but also the field of literature and the study of literature. So I think it does sort of bring a lot of people in, and is part of that promotion of fantasy literature through Tolkien, who was Rawlinson and Bosworth Professor of Anglo-Saxon here at Pembroke College for 20 years. Related to this is the Pembroke Tolkien Memorial, which you can see in Old Quad, if you haven't already seen it. And again, that's about promoting fantasy literature storytelling through Tolkien. So one of the things we have on the side is Anglo-Saxon runes, Old English runes, which is a line from Beowulf. And talking to a lot of teachers in the English faculty at Oxford, they say a lot of the students come in through Game of Thrones or Tolkien, and that's the gateway drug, if you like, to get them in through the door. And then we get them learning Old English and studying Beowulf and all that other good stuff. So it's not purely about Tolkien, it's about getting people through the door. And we always felt that there was an appetite for these kind of stories. Fantasy is incredibly popular. Everyone knows about Lord of the Rings, Game of Thrones, Harry Potter. If there was an appetite for it, we should be feeding it, not just with Peter Jackson and video games, as great as those things are, but also academic talks and study. And so we can be part of that bigger conversation. Completely separately from this, but somewhat related in my mind, is the work I've done on access to education. And this really started for me at Pembroke, getting involved with the Access program here with Dr. Peter Klaus. And it's really based on the idea that I'm very passionate about, which is that everyone should have access to education, no matter their background, no matter where they were born or what their family circumstances are. The only barrier to education, I think, should be the difficulty of the material itself. Most people don't want to study. Most people, have a ceiling about where they kind of, they stop being interested in something. So the people who are interested, who want to study, they should always have the opportunity to do that. And so one thing I've become involved with is a charity called Ashinaga. It was established in Japan in the 1960s. It's one of the biggest charities in Japan, actually. And in the past 10 years or so, they've broadened out to provide access to education and leadership development for orphaned youth in African countries. And now today we recruit in 49 countries across the continent, and students study at universities across the world, including in the UK. Here, University of York and University of Warwick provide all the tuition costs for our students. and then we provide the stipends and the leadership development training, because the idea is that it is a scholarship through which people make an impact on the world and transform their communities. So the idea is that the students all go back home, either to their countries or to the African continent, to initiate change. And for me, this is really bound up with the idea of outreach, because one of the kind of underlying points of outreach is, well, why are we doing this? Why are we talking to all these people? And it's, I think for me, partly because we don't want people to be left out. We don't want people who are brilliant, who are wanting to study, who have great ideas, to miss out on those opportunities. And so we want to reach out to them. We want to talk to them. We want them to talk to us as well. And so the work I've done through Ashinaga has, in my mind, been bound up with all the outreach work I've done as well. So you've got a photo of me in Uganda teaching, but also University of York more recently. And today I work for the charity on partnerships and getting corporate sponsorships and working with universities as well on that. So just briefly, I also teach at Signum University, which is an online university in the States. And like Utah Valley University, it has a very open recruitment. It does a master's in English literature and it specializes in fantasy and Tolkien studies, but also teaches Old English. We do quite rigorous master's level courses. And that also brings in a lot of people who wouldn't otherwise be doing a master's course. The only requirement actually is that you have an undergraduate degree, but it can be in any subject. So we get a lot of scientists coming in, we get a lot of priests, we get a lot of retired people doing the masters. And again, that's part of the outreach and part of the open access. And because it's online only, the tuition costs are really low because we don't have to pay for buildings. You lose out on stuff like this. I mean, I'm not rejecting wonderful places like Pembroke College. You gain so much from being in the same space as other people. But for many people, online education is a great way of accessing education that they wouldn't otherwise be able to access. Now I've broken this. So there we go. If you get, no.
Oh, back
I
one.
just went too far.
Back one.
Back one.
Too basic, sucky.
Let's see. Thank you very much. The last slide is a little bit frivolous, but it's about YouTube outreach. And this is something I've started doing quite recently. I have been making videos for my students for a number of years. Thank you. Oh, no, almost. There we go. YouTube outreach. So I've been making videos for my students for a number of years, my online students who are mostly based in America. And I thought, what a great opportunity, me being based in Oxford, I can show them some of the places that I've been talking about and do little video documentaries about these places. And they've become more and more elaborate. And quite recently, I've started putting these on YouTube. So I am fairly early on in this process. I mean, you can see my thumbnails there for my most recent videos. I only have, I think, 107 subscribers, so I'm very, very small with this.
108.
Thank you so much. This is not a pitch, but do check me out, Gabriel Schenk. On this point, I want to highlight the work of someone else who I met at Pembroke, Becky Spathurst, who was doing her DPhil at Pembroke whilst I was here. And she has, I think, 750,000 subscribers. I think she's now at Christchurch, and she's doing amazing videos about astrophysics. So it is this enormous, wonderful world of YouTube outreach. And you can actually do some quite complicated videos. Some of these videos are 5 hours long, and lots of people watch them. So it is a great thing to get involved with. I'm in the early stages of YouTube outreach myself. On that point, we also put the Tolkien lecture series on YouTube, and those videos get tens of thousands of views as well. So YouTube is a really nice bit of online outreach for me. That's it. I've broken the presentation.
Thank you to all our contributors. I wanted to ask you It is very evident, of course, that technology allows us, as you were saying with YouTube, I don't know if any of you have kids who are studying at school or university, but there is so much available to support them in GCSEs and A-levels and so on. And it's really very, very good and well structured. So it's very evident what, the benefit is in that direction. But just like the vagus nerve, it's a two-way street. And when you reach out to people and talk to them about what their interest is in the subject, often they tell you things which enrich your understanding very much. So I just wondered if all four of you could talk a little bit about that. You touched on this, Nicholas, that, what you get back from people enlightens you and helps you on your journey too. The kind of questions that people ask, in broadcast and news, often we're going out and getting vox pops from people, right? And they say the most extraordinary thing. It's like, the knowledge they don't have, the things that they don't understand, the questions they want answering. And it's very helpful indeed. So, or maybe I should start with you, Katerina, given that you spoke first. If any of you have thoughts on things that people may have said to you that have made a light bulb switch on in your head as to where you might take your work.
I suppose we tend to think of public engagement as, communicating our work or our findings from the field outwards. Yeah. But, especially in science, sometimes the public may help actually, design your idea for kind of research, or even participate and actually be involved themselves. And even if you are kind of, expert in the field, sometimes still hearing people's, comments or own experiences. I know people that have designed studies around someone saying, I took this, medication and then it had, this effect, and, they look into it. And, so things, even if it starts with some kind of anecdotal point in a conversation, when you like online, you can see, how there are so many, connections everywhere. I think that's one of the best things about being able to have in this kind of digital world. I think about people that were kind of university generation before, and, having to find journals in the library, you had to know what you wanted to look for, whereas now you can just kind of always search the other way. It's what just like search words and find kind of relevant research findings that can inform your ideas. But I think also I find a lot of my talks, like there's a real kind of interest from the public for kind of wellness, and my kind of work in biological psychological sciences obviously overlaps a lot with health, and so a lot of the questions you get are kind of related to that. But you're always kind of learning as well as interacting, engaging with them as well.
I think two things. I mean, I didn't belabor it, but actually the research project that I run has been absolutely shaped by trying to give the students we work with ownership of their own projects. In fact, when they get cited in court, it's always the students who've worked most on the project whose names are top, which was really important to me, that they felt a sort of ownership of it. And so sometimes when we've been thinking about, well, what is the next sort of chunk of the project we'd like to do, we've actually consulted quite broadly with the students who might be working on it to say, we could do this, what would interest you most? So there is that conversation to have. The other thing to say about the broader public is the public have been spoilt by Google. I know Kathryn will talk a lot about this. If you say to Google, where can I get a good hot chocolate? Google will give you an answer, and it will be good enough. And people are really used to being able to type into a box on the internet a question and getting an answer that is good enough. But when you're trying to present academic work, especially legal work, it needs to be correct and comprehensive. And training people that they actually want correct and comprehensive answers as opposed to quick, good enough answers, which is what 99% of the time the internet gives them, is quite hard. So we've had some quite difficult... I mean, the very first version of our digital tools were incredibly academic and hard to use, and we're sort of in an intermediate stage. We've really been thinking quite carefully about what does a member of the public want to see when they put a question in? What does a law clerk late at night doing research for their boss read immediately? How do we give them that, but without compromising accuracy and richness, and it's actually a very difficult thing to do. So it's one thing to communicate very high-level things to the public, but actually if you want the public to really engage with proper academic work, it's about actually untraining them, or at least meeting them where they are, and then taking them on a journey to say, I know you think you just want a quick yes or no answer to this, but actually this is what you need to engage with.
Yeah.
And that's very hard.
And that is the skill. Does anybody have any pressing questions? Because I'm very conscious of the time. Yes, please. If you'd say your name first.
Very briefly, actually, I just want to pick up on the word that I heard twice in the session. By the way, thank you all. I thought it was brilliant. And that's trust. Because I think in public engagement, trust is a big issue. And the reason I'm asking these questions is because I'm involved in local politics. And I'm not expecting solutions, because unless you got them and you can see me afterwards. Because it's more about, we've heard about trust in public institutions, we've heard about trust in science. And I think it is a massive issue. So I just wondered if anyone's got any sort of anecdotes or words of wisdom about how
you build trust. How you build trust. And yes, go ahead, Kathryn.
After you.
By doing. So a lot of the public engagement work that I do is do first and then the questions come later. So the thing that I think that establishes is I can do this. I have something to give here. I have something to contribute. I know how this works. I'm discovering how this works. And then as soon as the questions come, they come from a place of enjoyment, curiosity. And then when you've got that, then you're 90% of the way forward to where you want to get to, because people feel very receptive at that moment. I think that comes from confidence. So you have to be confident to sort of instill confidence before you can have a really positive, fruitful engagement. So lots of the projects that I've done, are, like with most crowdsourcing, tasks in fact are super low barrier to entry. To make it really obvious how to get started, how to get, a little way along in the task. And then all of the kind of curiosity and questioning comes later. And then once you're there, I think the trust is high on the participant side, and you can match it. The barriers to entry. Gabriel.
Yeah, well, trust is really important on the internet. And there have been some scandals recently on YouTube. Video essays is what they're called. So people putting out academic information. And actually, some of these have been exposed to be heavily plagiarized. And so this has caused a lot of disruption, a lot of people not trusting the information now and where it's coming from. And of course, there's all this, fake information as well, and the rise of AI, hallucinating things and so on. So what I think we can do, those of us with academic training, is always cite our sources and talk about where these ideas are from, and actually build that into the narrative of our outreach. Having a PhD does not mean I'm better at speaking about stuff than other people necessarily, but it does give me a sort of a grounding in best practice in academic discussion, and not being afraid, in fact, being good at incorporating other people's arguments and citing them and building on them, I think is a really important part of building that trust online.
I think trust is going to be central going forward, and there's a whole big discussion around that, of course, because of social media. But we must end, unfortunately, because it's 12 o'clock. Thank you so much for your attention this morning and your time. Kathryn, Gabriel, Katerina and Eccles, thank you, all of you, for your work. Thank you.